You walk into a pet store, and somewhere in the corner behind glass sits a vibrant bird. Red, blue, yellow. It's as if someone painted it just to make it look unreal. You gaze at it for 5 seconds, maybe 10, think, "What a beautiful parrot," and move on. That's it. For most people, that's where their encounter with the hyacinth macaw ends, and honestly, it's one of the biggest injustices we commit against a living being. Because what's behind that glass isn't just a bird, it's one of the most complex, intelligent, and emotionally developed creatures on the planet. And now I'll explain why, after watching this video, you'll never be able to look at them the same way again. Let's start with numbers, because they help illustrate the scale of what we're talking about. The hyacinth macaw is the largest of all parrots on Earth. Its length from head to tail can reach 1 meter. Its wingspan is about 1.5 meters. This bird weighs up to 1.5 kilograms. And when it spreads its wings and soars above the tropical forest canopy, it's a sight that literally takes people's breath away. Its feathers are a rich cobalt blue, so deep that in the sunlight they appear almost electric. Around its eyes and at the base of its beak are bright yellow patches of bare skin that give its face an expressive quality, almost like a human face. And this isn't by chance, but we'll talk more about that later. Now, the most important thing. The hyacinth macaw can live up to 80 years. Think about that number, 80 years. This means that a parrot hatched in 1950 could very well be alive right now, at the moment you're listening to this text. It has lived through the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the rise of the internet, smartphones, and artificial intelligence. It remembers the voices of people who have long since passed away. It has witnessed the changes in the forest around it, if it's lucky enough for the forest to still be there. When we talk about the lifespan of a macaw, we're not just discussing biology. We're talking about a creature that lives a full human lifespan, experiencing all its stages: childhood, adolescence, maturity, and old age. And since we're on the topic of sounds, the cry of a hyacinth macaw can be heard from 16 kilometers away. That's not a typo or an exaggeration. It's a distance that an average person can walk in about 3 hours, and the macaw covers it with a single cry. In the dense tropical forest, where trees stand like walls and absorb sound, this is an incredible evolutionary achievement. This cry isn't just noise. It's a complex communication system, a kind of language that birds use to communicate over vast distances, conveying information about food, danger, and their location. But we'll get to that too. There are about 20 species of macaws on the planet, and they all live in one giant region, from southern Mexico through Central America and further down through the Amazon to Argentina. This is a colossal territory, and in each part of it, macaws occupy their own niche. Red macaws, green-winged macaws, blue and yellow macaws, and small soldier macaws. All have their own preferences for forest height, types of nuts they feed on, and even social structures within their flocks. This isn't just one bird in 20 color variations, it's 20 different survival stories, each written over millions of years of evolution. And here's where we get to the crux of the matter. What distinguishes macaws from most other birds and places them alongside creatures we consider intelligent: dolphins, chimpanzees, and elephants. A macaw isn't just a bird with bright feathers and a loud voice. It's a creature whose brain, despite its small size, is structured with an astonishing density of neurons. Birds in general have neurons packed much more densely than mammals, and a parrot's brain weighing 10 grams can contain as many neurons as a primate's brain that weighs several times more. This means that a macaw thinks, not in a metaphorical sense, not just for show. A macaw analyzes situations, makes decisions, remembers faces, recognizes specific people and other birds, forms attachments that last for decades, and experiences the loss of a partner in such a way that scientists have documented signs of clinical depression in bereaved birds. This bird has a body designed for flying hundreds of kilometers a day. Wings that carry it above the forest canopy at speeds of up to 56 kilometers per hour. A beak that exerts a pressure of 350 newtons and cracks nuts that you couldn't break with a hammer. Skin on its face with a unique pattern, just like your fingerprint. Eyes that see colors for which we don't even have names in our language. And alongside all this is an emotional world that we're just beginning to understand. Macaws form lifelong pairs, and this isn't just a figure of speech. They fly side by side, eat together, preen each other's feathers, and sleep pressed against one another. When one partner dies, the other may refuse to eat and stop flying. This isn't anthropomorphism or sentimentality. It's documented behavior observed by dozens of field biologists in Brazilian and Bolivian studies. So what do we have here? We have an evolutionary experiment that has lasted millions of years, resulting in a creature that combines the intelligence of a primate, the body of a perfect flyer, and an emotional life that resembles that of a social mammal more than what we typically associate with birds. Before us is the macaw, and it deserves to be truly recognized. When you look at a macaw, the first thing that catches your eye is the color. Bright, incredibly beautiful feathers that are hard to look away from. But if you stop there, you'll miss the most interesting part. Because the real story of the macaw isn't about feather color. It's about the engineering solutions that nature has perfected over millions of years to create a body perfectly adapted for survival in one of the most challenging places on the planet, the tropical forests of South America. And every detail of this body, from its beak to the tips of its feathers, tells its own story. Let's start with what you notice second after the color, the beak. The macaw's beak is perhaps one of the most perfect tools in the entire animal kingdom. It's massive, curved, black or dark gray, and looks as if it were cast from metal. And that impression isn't too far from the truth, because what this beak does is closer to the work of industrial pincers than what we typically expect from a bird's beak. The pressure that a macaw generates when it bites down reaches 350 newtons. To put that into perspective, this force is enough to crack a Brazil nut. And a Brazil nut isn't the kind of nut you can crack with your fingers in the kitchen. The shell of a Brazil nut can withstand pressure of up to 150 kilograms. People use hammers and vices to break it open, but a macaw does it with its beak, calmly sitting on a branch, doing it dozens of times every day for decades without a single crack on its beak. Because a macaw's beak constantly grows and renews, like human nails, only much stronger and with perfectly calculated geometry. The upper part acts as a lever, the lower part as an anvil, and together they create a pressure point that breaks through any defense. But the beak is only half the system. The other half is the tongue. And here's where things get truly surprising, even for zoologists. The macaw's tongue doesn't resemble the tongues of most birds. It's thick, fleshy, and mobile, with a bone inside it. A bone inside the tongue is a rarity even among parrots, and an absolute exoticism among birds in general. This bone turns the tongue into a fully functional manipulator, something like a finger that the macaw uses to hold the nut. Turn it to the right side, bring it to the breaking point, and hold it steady while the beak does its job. In fact, a macaw eats the way a carpenter works, holding one tool with one hand and processing with another. This level of coordination requires serious computational power from the brain, which is why parrots have highly developed areas responsible for fine motor skills and spatial reasoning. Now take a look at the macaw's face, at those bright patches of skin around its eyes, and at the base of its beak, which are featherless. Most people think these are just a decorative element, something like makeup. In reality, these patches serve several critically important functions. The first is thermoregulation. The tropical forest is a place where temperatures rarely drop below 25 degrees Celsius, and humidity consistently stays above 80%. In such conditions, overheating is a real threat. especially for a bird that actively flies and expends a huge amount of energy. The bare patches of skin on the face act like radiators. Through them, the bird sheds excess heat by regulating blood flow to the skin's surface. When the macaw gets hot, blood vessels expand and heat escapes through the bare skin. When the temperature is normal, the vessels constrict, minimizing heat loss. A simple, elegant system that works without a single movement. But the second function is even more interesting. The pattern of blood vessels and small folds on these bare patches of skin is unique to each bird. In fact, to every single one. Like a human fingerprint, like the stripes of a zebra. No two macaws on the planet have exactly the same pattern as another. Scientists working with wild populations use this for identifying individual birds. They take close-up photographs of the face and enter the images into a database. But even more importantly, it seems that the macaws themselves also use these patterns to recognize each other. In a flock of hundreds of birds, where everyone is colored similarly, the face is your passport, your business card, the thing that distinguishes you from all the others. And when a macaw looks at another macaw, it sees not just a bird of its species, but a specific, familiar individual with a specific history of relationships. And the last thing to mention about the macaw's body in this section is its eyes. And here we enter a territory that truly flips our understanding of reality. The human eye contains 3 types of cones, cells responsible for color perception. Thanks to them, we see red, green, and blue, as well as all their combinations. This is our palette, and we consider it complete because we don't know any other. The macaw has 4 types of cones. The 4th type perceives the ultraviolet spectrum, light that simply doesn't exist for us. This means that a macaw sees the world in colors we can't even imagine. Not theoretically, but literally. Our brains can't construct a color for which there's no receptor. When a macaw looks at the feathers of another macaw, it sees patterns that are invisible to us. A flower that looks simply yellow to us burns with a complex ornament of ultraviolet lines, pointing the way to nectar. The macaw's world is a different version of reality, richer, more detailed, and more informative than our own. But that's not all. There's evidence suggesting that parrots can perceive the Earth's magnetic field. Special molecules in the cells of their retinas react to magnetic lines, allowing the bird to literally see direction, north, south, as part of its visual world. For a macaw that flies tens and hundreds of kilometers a day in search of food, over an endless green carpet of forest, where landmarks blend into a uniform canvas, this is an inbuilt compass that can't be lost and doesn't need calibration. It simply opens its eyes and knows where to fly. This is what a macaw's body is like. It's not just a collection of random features. It's an integrated system where each element, the beak, tongue, skin, eyes, works together with the others, creating a creature that excels at cracking the toughest nuts in the world, regulating its temperature without breaking a sweat, recognizing familiar faces, and navigating by the planet's magnetic field. Millions of years of evolution are embedded in every cell of this body. And the result isn't just a bird. It's a flying laboratory, every square centimeter of which deserves its own study. And we haven't even begun to talk about what happens inside its head, about intelligence, social connections, how macaws communicate with each other, and make decisions. Up to this point, we've talked about the macaw's body, the beak, eyes, skin, everything that can be seen and measured. But the real story begins where anatomy ends and what happens inside this bird's head begins. And here's where I need to say something important right away. Almost everything we know about parrot intelligence comes from one specific bird and one specific woman who dedicated 30 years of her life to it. The bird was named Alex. He was an African gray parrot, not a macaw, but a close relative in terms of cognitive abilities. The woman was Irene Pepperberg, a Harvard scientist who in 1977 did something that many of her colleagues openly laughed at. She bought a parrot at a regular pet store and began talking to him. Not in a casual sense. Not Keisha, say hello. She systematically taught him language using strict scientific methodology, recording every result and publishing data in peer-reviewed journals. Over 30 years of working together, Alex mastered over 100 English words. But it's not about the number of words. In the end, a starling can record 100 words too. It's about the fact that Alex understood what those words meant. He could look at a tray of objects of different colors, shapes, and materials, and when asked, "How many blue cubes are here?" he would answer correctly. He distinguished between more and less, same and different. He grasped the concept of zero, the idea of absence that children start to understand only at 3 or 4 years old, and which many adult primates struggle with in experiments. When shown a tray with no blue objects and asked how many blues, he would respond, 0. This isn't imitation, this isn't training. This is an understanding of an abstract mathematical concept expressed through a language that diverged from our evolutionary branch over 300 million years ago. Alex passed away in 2007. His last words to Irene Pepperberg the evening before were, "Be good, see you tomorrow, I love you." Sure, one could say this was a rehearsed phrase, but Irene, who had worked with him for 30 years, thought otherwise. And the data she collected over those decades suggests we have no grounds to deny this bird an understanding of what it was saying. Now let's return to macaws. They haven't participated in lengthy laboratory programs like Alex, but in the experiments where they've been tested, they've shown results that made researchers rethink their ideas about avian intelligence. Macaws can solve multi-step tasks, the ones where you first need to use a short stick to reach a long stick, and then use the long stick to get food. This is a planning task, requiring the ability to hold a chain of actions in mind, and understand that the first step doesn't yield a reward by itself, but leads to a second step that does. Crows and cockatoos can do this, and the fact that macaws can handle it just as well places them in the elite club of the most intellectually advanced birds on the planet. But a macaw's intelligence truly reveals itself not in the lab, but in the wild, in the context of social life within the flock. And this is where things get fascinating for any attentive observer. Wild macaws have regional dialects. This isn't just a figure of speech or an oversimplification. A flock of macaws living in one part of the forest uses a set of calls that differs from the set of calls of a flock living 50 kilometers to the east. The difference isn't in volume or tone, it's in the structure of the sounds, their sequence, how they combine. Chicks learn the local dialect from their parents and neighbors, just as a child from Krasnodar will speak differently than a child from Arkhangelsk, even though both speak Russian. When researchers recorded calls from macaws in different regions of Brazil and played them to birds from another area, the latter reacted differently, cautiously, with heightened attention, as if they were hearing a foreign language. A familiar dialect meant, "These are ours," while an unfamiliar one signaled, "We need to figure out who this is." The communication system within the flock is more complex than it seems at first glance. When a flock of macaws feeds in a tree, individual birds take on the role of sentinels. They perch higher than the others, on open branches, and watch the surroundings. Upon spotting a predator, a hawk, eagle, or large snake, a sentinel emits a specific call that differs from all the other calls, and the entire flock reacts instantly. Moreover, different types of threats elicit different calls. An aerial predator and a ground predator are signaled differently, and the flock's response varies accordingly. When there's an aerial threat, the birds freeze and press against the trunk. For a ground threat, they take flight. This isn't a reflex, it's the transmission of specific information through sound, and responding to that information requires understanding its content. Collective decision-making is another trait that sets macaws apart from other birds. Before the flock takes off and flies to a new tree for feeding, something happens that ornithologists call negotiation. Several birds start emitting specific calls, others join in. The intensity builds, and at some point, the flock takes off simultaneously, as if on command. But there's no command. There's a collective decision formed through the exchange of signals. If part of the flock isn't ready to fly, the departure is postponed. This mechanism resembles voting more than following a leader. And finally, there's something researchers consider one of the most convincing signs of high intelligence in any species: play. Young macaws play. They pick up sticks, pine cones, pieces of bark, and manipulate them without any food-related goal. They roll objects, toss them, pass them to each other, steal, and pass them back. They hang upside down from branches, swing, and push each other. They do this not because they're hungry, not because they're learning to forage, and not because they're preparing for reproduction. They do it because it's fun. Purposeful play without a utilitarian goal is behavior that's extremely rare among birds and is considered a marker of a complex cognitive system in behavioral biology. To play, one needs to have free brain resources, an ability to imagine, and a need for stimulation that goes beyond basic survival. When you put all this together, understanding abstract concepts, planning several steps ahead, regional dialects, a warning system with different signals for different threats, collective decision-making, and play for the sake of play, you get a picture of a creature that can't be adequately described with the word bird without feeling like you're leaving something out. It's an intelligent social animal with a language, culture, and emotions that just happens to be covered in feathers and can fly. We already know that a macaw is a creature with a powerful body, complex intelligence, and an emotional life that resembles that of a dolphin or chimpanzee more than what we typically associate with birds. But there's another side to this story that almost no one talks about, and it may be the most important of all. A macaw isn't just a resident of the tropical forest. A macaw is one without whom the tropical forest literally cannot exist in its current form. And to understand why, we need to look at what this bird does every day, simply living its ordinary life. Every morning, a flock of macaws rises from their roost and flies out to feed. Their routes can stretch for tens of kilometers from one fruiting tree to another. Macaws eat nuts, fruits, and seeds, and in the process, they do one thing that almost no one else in the ecosystem can do for them. They carry the seeds of large trees over vast distances. The fact is that many tropical trees produce fruits that are so large and heavy that ordinary birds and small mammals simply can't swallow, carry, or even move them. These fruits fall beneath the parent tree, and if no one picks them up and takes them away, the seeds will sprout in the shade of their parent, where they won't get enough light, space, or resources, and they will die. The macaw solves this problem. It takes a nut, flies several kilometers with it, eats the flesh, and drops or discards the seed in a completely different place, where it has a chance to sprout and grow into a full tree. This is called seed dispersal, and for dozens of species of large tropical trees, the macaw is the primary, and sometimes the only, mechanism for reproduction. Remove the macaw from the forest, and these trees will lose their ability to spread. In one generation, there will be fewer of them. In 2 generations, significantly fewer. After several generations, the species composition of the forest will begin to change because the large trees will be replaced by other species with smaller seeds that are carried by the wind or small birds. The forest will become different, less diverse, less resilient, and less capable of supporting the incredible web of life that makes the tropics what they are. A macaw isn't just an ornament of the forest. A macaw is a structural element, and if it's removed, the building will start to collapse. And now that we understand this, it's time to look at the numbers. And these numbers aren't encouraging. At the beginning of the 20th century, the population of the hyacinth macaw, the 1-meter cobalt blue parrot with a beak that cracks Brazil nuts, was estimated by scientists to be around 100,000 individuals. 100,000 birds flying every morning over the Pantanal, Cerrado, and eastern Amazon, filling the forest with cries that can be heard from 16 kilometers away. Today, there are fewer than 6,500 left. In just over 100 years, we've wiped out more than 93% of the population, 93%, and what's left continues to decline. There are two reasons for this, both man-made. The first is habitat destruction. The tropical forests of Brazil are being cut down for agriculture, cattle pastures, and soybean plantations. Every year, thousands of square kilometers of forest disappear, and with each hectare, nesting trees, feeding trees, and entire sections of roots that flocks have flown for decades vanish. A macaw can't nest just anywhere. It needs a cavity in an old large tree that has grown for 50, 70, or even 100 years before it becomes suitable for nesting. When such a tree is cut down, a new one won't grow in its place in a year, or even 10. A pair of macaws that loses its nesting tree may not find a replacement and may not breed at all. And considering that macaws already breed slowly, one pair raises 1 or 2 chicks a year, and not every year, each lost clutch hits the population disproportionately hard. The second reason is illegal trade. A hyacinth macaw on the black market can sell for tens of thousands of dollars. Bright, huge, with a reputation as the most impressive parrot on Earth, it becomes a trophy for collectors and a status symbol for people who want something unique at home. Poachers take chicks from nests, often destroying the nesting tree in the process, transport them under horrific conditions across borders, and a significant portion of the birds die before they even reach the buyer. Those who survive spend the rest of their lives in cages, alone, without a flock, without a partner, without flight, all the things that give life meaning for a creature with the intelligence and emotions we just discussed. But there's another side to this story, and it would be unfair not to mention it. Since 1990, a project called the Blue Macaw Institute, Instituto Arara Azul, has been operating in Brazil. Founded by biologist Noiva Guedes, this project has become one of the most successful parrot conservation programs in the world over 3 decades. The Institute's team conducts constant monitoring of wild populations. They know every nesting pair, track every chick, and document every loss. They install artificial nests, specially designed wooden boxes that are attached to trees and replace lost cavities. And critically, they work with local farmers and landowners, explaining that a living macaw on their land is worth more than a dead forest, because ecotourism built around observing these birds brings a stable income that pastures don't always provide. And it works. In the regions where the project operates, the number of nesting pairs has stabilized, and in some areas, it has begun to grow. Chicks survive more often because artificial nests are better protected from flooding and predators than natural cavities. Farmers who once cut down trees without a second thought now preserve them because they understand that a tree with a macaw nest isn't a hindrance but an asset. But we need to be honest to the end. 6,500 birds is catastrophically low for a species that once numbered 100,000. Conservation programs work, but they work locally, while forest destruction continues on a scale that local projects can't compensate for. Every year, while we debate, discuss, and plan, a little more forest disappears. A few more nesting trees, a few more pairs that couldn't raise chicks. And here's what's important to understand at the end of this story. The fate of the macaw isn't just a story about one bird. It's a story about an entire ecosystem. When we lose a macaw, we're not just losing a beautiful creature with blue feathers and intelligent eyes. We're losing a seed disperser without which dozens of species of trees lose their ability to reproduce. We're losing a link in the chain that holds the tropical forest as it is. We're losing a creature that remembers faces, speaks in dialects, plays for pleasure, and loves one partner for life. To save the macaw means to save not just a bird, but the world in which that bird is possible. And that world, it's the only one we have. There's no backup. Thank you for subscribing to the channel and liking the video.